1990s, as some of us will recall, there was this enormous bioethics and research controversy about perinatal HIV trials that were being conducted in low-resource countries around the world to test the efficacy of a short course of AZT to prevent babies from being HIV infected whose mothers were HIV infected. And this was building on some extraordinarily successful clinical trials that had happened in the United States and France that showed that if you gave a pregnant woman who was HIV infected AZT in her pregnancy and during labor and delivery and to her baby after birth, you could lessen the chance that her baby would be infected almost fourfold. And the standard of care changed immediately in the United States that all women who were known to be HIV infected during pregnancy were given this AZT regimen. Because at the time the regimen was both very long and complicated, it was delivered over about 8 months total, 6 during pregnancy and 2 afterwards. It assumed that deliveries were in the hospital and there were IVs available for the babies, and it was very expensive, all these things. It was quite clear that that wasn't going to become the standard of care in resource-poor countries, at least anytime soon. And so a lot of trials were started building on the concept that some amount of AZT maybe could prevent transmission, such that 16 trials were coordinated around the world that were testing different kinds of regimens, like 3 or 4 weeks of AZT to the pregnant woman at the end of her pregnancy, against a placebo to see what the outcome would be. And this was as the result of a big consensus conference in Geneva, where people from resource-poor countries said, we need an answer, we need something that makes sense for our people, and it ought to be a lot of short course kinds of trials, and they ought to be placebo-controlled. So that's what happened. A year or two into these trials actually going out into the field, Public Citizen, a very important nonprofit advocacy group in Washington, held a press release and followed it with what turned out to be visible editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine, saying that all of these studies were unethical, they created a double standard, and that placebo-controlled trials shouldn't be done in poor countries if we wouldn't do them in the United States. And this became an enormous controversy that I would say in 2013 has still not been resolved. But having been involved with HIV research at Hopkins and having developed, although I think this is part of what I love about Johns Hopkins, collaborative relationships with so many other people, and I really think that's the culture that exists at Johns Hopkins. People came together to say, what should we do? And it was not only what's the right answer, but as an example, our same dean I spoke of earlier, Al Somer, said, we're an educational institution, we need to have a big forum on this. And at his instigation, there was a forum. Sid Wolf from Public Citizen came in, and a few other people on the panel. There were close to 1,000 people who attended. And I was one of the people who spoke there. And it was really to try to understand what are the ethical values at stake when people think it's appropriate to have a placebo-controlled trial, and what are the ethical values at stake when people think that it's not appropriate. And I was really there to try to paint both sides of the debate through an ethics lens, and a very close colleague of mine, Steve Goodman, did the same from a sort of study design, epidemiology, statistics lens. Subsequent to that big session, it seemed like there was an imperative to try to understand international research ethics more and try to understand how are the issues the same as we've been thinking about them in the United States when we've thought about research ethics, and how are they different, and to the extent to which they're different, is it because these countries have less money? Is it because of different cultural norms? What's going on if we even say things are different? And as so many of us commented during these very heated debates about the AZT trials, we, and again, so many other people commented that most of the debates were going on between Americans. And so we started to apply for grants to try to both do some amount of case study development in resource-poor countries around research, but most importantly, to try to get money to develop training so that people from Africa, which became our focus, could be fluent enough in the ethics piece of all of these conversations that they could be their own voice and wouldn't rely on Harold Varmus and Peter Lorre to duke it out. So we ended up in a very short period of time getting 3 different grants from the NIH that looked at international research ethics, and that just sort of became a larger focus of what we do, what I do.